Bueno, buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon, everybody. We can begin.
Teníamos dos cosas pendientes.
We had two pending issues. The first, reaching a quorum, which with the latest arrivals into the room we have now done. And secondly, very importantly, to validate this morning's decisions. This morning, under Rule 108, we were able to work with a quarter of the committee members present. We could hold a meeting, but what cannot be done, as was said by one delegation quite rightly, is adopt any decisions. So my proposal now is that we need now that we do have a quorum, we need to be able to ratify, validate the decisions we took this morning under items 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the agenda.
Si no hay
If there are no objections to that, then what we agreed upon this morning is adopted. Thank you. Now we can move on to the second part of item 4, which was still pending from this morning.
Quiero decir que
And the Bureau was informed that 3 member states had formulated objections to the request for accreditation by NGOs in the open-ended working group. During the consultations, the 3 member states confirmed to the Bureau that they were opposed to the request for accreditation, the application for accreditation by the Syrian Expatriates Medical Association. Upon the request of the chair, the members of the Bureau informed their respective regional groups about the objections received. In this regard, I would like to recall paragraph C, Roman 2 of the decision adopted on the participation of the NGO in the work of the open-ended working group on ageing, as appears in document A/AC278/2011/2, which says that at the beginning of each session, the open-ended working group will examine new applications which one member state of the working group has formulated an objection to, and will take a decision on that. In this regard, I invite the working group to examine the new applications upon which no objection has been formulated. So, as we agreed this morning, the work provided accreditation to 37 NGOs, where there had been no objection received, so that they would participate in the work of the working group. Now I invite the open-ended working group to examine the application submitted by the Syrian Expatriates Medical Association. Are there any comments? Yes, Turkey, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, we regret to see that objections have been raised for the accreditation of an NGO from Turkey to the 11th session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. The NGO, namely Syrian Expatriates Medical Association, SIMA, is an international humanitarian and medical relief organization which supports healthcare facilities and provides psychosocial support services with their medical team. Its branch in Turkey supports programs with the aim of responding to the healthcare needs of various age groups of Syrian refugees in Turkey, including elderly. Madam Chair, Non-governmental organizations are in a special position to make valuable contributions to the work of the UN, and more specifically of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. With their proximity to the people, expertise on various fields and on-the-ground experience, NGOs have the ability to understand and convey in a representative and comprehensive manner the needs and concerns of the people as they related to the work of the UN. The constructive engagement of civil society in the work of the UN enriches our discussions. By the same token, we believe that the accreditation of CIMA will be beneficial to both the deliberations in our working group and to the activities of this NGO. According to the modalities of participation of non-governmental organizations in the work of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, the group, at the beginning of each of its sessions, shall consider and take decision on new application against which a state member of the working group has raised an objection. In light of this, we respectfully ask for a vote to grant accreditation for the Syrian Expatriates Medical Association, and we kindly call on member states to support its participation and vote yes. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Gracias, Turquía.
Thank you, Turkey. I now give the floor to the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The NGO Medical Association of Syrian Expatriates is not involved in issues of aging and can make no contribution to improving the situation of older people. The legal basis for this organization is quite dubious. This organization avoids cooperating with the legitimate government of Syria and does not meet the requirements under international law. The main area of activity is implementing certain projects in regions of Syria controlled by terrorist groups, including the Nusra Front. This NGO is financed by concealed funding, a lot of anonymous contributions. So based on everything I've said, the Russian Federation cannot support the participation of these dubious representatives in the work of this working group. Thank you.
Doy ahora la palabra.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Syria. Syria, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We speak to explain our position vis-à-vis the participation of CIMA, or the Syrian Expatriate Medical Association, in the current session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. Madam Chair, cooperation between the Syrian government and the United Nations, as well as its agencies and our partners in terms of NGOs, they are 48 organizations, including NRC, DRC, ADRA, Oxfam, and all of them are well known. In addition, there are also national associations, which are 1,400. And this cooperation over the years of terrorist war imposed on my country enabled us to provide humanitarian assistance and social support, as well as health care and basic services to millions of Syrians, including those who live in areas called, some people call, are not governed by the Syrian government. So these organizations coordinate with the government of Syria in accordance with the General Assembly Resolution 46-182 in respect of the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and unity of my country, in line with the UN Charter, and also in line with the interests of all Syrians wherever they be. What does this mean, Madam Chair? It means that we could cover the humanitarian needs in Syria from inside Syria and not through crossings. And on the other hand, CIMA, or this Syrian Expatriate Medical Association, works outside this framework and without the approval of the Syrian government. Therefore, my country objects to the participation of CIMA in this session. I thank you, Madam Chair.
I
thank the representative of Syria for that statement. I now give the floor to the United States.
public space, as well as the invaluable work civil society and human rights defenders do around the world, and calls attention to this work, including through their participation in the UN. Civil society and human rights defenders are our eyes and ears on the ground and give us invaluable reporting at the grassroots level on a variety of human rights issues, including promoting and protecting the human rights of older persons. Today's example is another misuse of the no objection basis by some member states to thwart civil society participation in the UN. The international community should not accept these clearly politically motivated attempts to block credible NGOs working on important issues on the ground. We must continue to ensure accountability for challenges to civil society participation across UN bodies and meetings by bringing any attempts to block NGOs to the full membership for a vote, as we are doing so today. To this end, the United States will be voting in favor of granting CIMA status to participate in this year's working group. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Gracias a la delegación.
I thank the delegation of the United States and now give the floor to Canada.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Canada firmly supports the open and transparent participation of the Syrian Expatriates Medical Association, or CIMA. Canada believes this civil society participation enhances the work at the UN, including the work of this open-ended working group. NGOs regularly provide creative solutions, convey crucial information to and from organizations and individuals on the ground, possess valuable expertise and understanding of the local context in which they operate, and help ensure that the UN delivers on its aim of leaving no one behind. We believe that a diversity of voices at the UN enriches our discussions and ensures that various viewpoints are considered. An inclusive system benefits us all. We are disappointed that the Syrian Expatriates Medical Association has attempted to have been blocked from participation at this session. We firmly support the ability of NGOs to make their voices heard at the UN as independent actors in their own right, including here in this open-ended working group. For these reasons, we encourage member states to vote in favor of accreditation for this NGO. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Gracias a la
I thank the delegation of Canada and now give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Civil society can and does play a powerful role in delivering services and amplifying the voices of those traditionally marginalized within society. Its work is vital for protecting human rights, democratic values, and holding those in power to account. Our work here at the UN and across the world would be less effective without the important contribution of civil society organizations. We should welcome the varied perspectives and constructive challenge that a diverse range of civil society participants bring to our discussions. The United Kingdom is committed to championing civil society globally, including here at the UN. It is disappointing that civil society is not always given the platform it deserves to discuss and debate important issues across the UN's agenda. As the UN, we can benefit from civil society's experience and viewpoints, but only if we allow their voices to be heard. The United Kingdom will vote in favor of the participation of the Syrian Expatriates Medical Association at the open-ended working group, and we urge others to do the same. Thank you.
Agradezco a
I thank the United Kingdom for that statement and now give the floor to the European Union.
Madam Chair, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union. The European Union attaches great importance to the participation of civil society organizations at the UN. Civil society makes an indispensable contribution to our work on countless issues, including the promotion and protection of the human rights of older persons. Indeed, in previous sessions of the open-ended working group on aging, we have benefited from the active participation of a diverse range of civil society experts, whose contributions have greatly enriched our discussions. We look forward to similar engagement by civil society during the coming days. In a world that is increasingly hostile to NGOs, manifested through legal or political steps to strive the work of civil society, or through direct or even fatal attacks on human rights defenders, it is all the more incumbent upon the UN and its members to facilitate NGO access and participation at the UN. The UN's member states, together with other delegations, have on several occasions raised concerns with the way that the non-objection clause is being applied in practice. We continue to insist on a better approach, one which provides for the full participation of all civil society organizations relevant to the discussion, without the possibility for arbitrary exclusions by any single member state that do not provide real reasoning. The final decision on the list of civil society organizations must not be that of a single member state. We therefore regret that objections have been submitted in relation to the participation of the said non-governmental organization, the Syrian Expatriates Medical Association. We encourage all member states to vote in support of its accreditation. Thank you.
Agradecemos.
We thank the representation of the European Union for that statement. I would like to know whether any other representative wishes to speak.
Bueno, se ha solicitado.
So a registered vote has been requested, a recorded vote. The working group will now vote on the accreditation to the Syrian Expatriates Medical Association to participate in its work. Before giving the floor, may I remind delegations that there were 38 NGOs who asked to be accredited, and 37 were accredited. That is, there was only any objection to one civil society organisation. This is something we should bear in mind, I believe. Before giving the floor for explanations of vote before the vote, may I remind delegations that explanations of vote are limited to 10 minutes and should be made by delegations from their seats. Does any delegation wish to make a general statement before the vote?
Muy bien.
Very well. So, the rules state that once the chair has announced that the voting has begun, no representative can interrupt it, except for, to raise a point of order pertaining to the way in which the vote is taking place. So we will start the process of voting. Those who are in favor of granting accreditation to the NGO, please indicate it. Those who are against it, indicate it, and those who wish to abstain.
Voting on the decision to grant accreditation to the Syrian Expatriates Medical Association. Those who vote yes will be voting in favor of the accreditation. Those who will vote no vote against the accreditation. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
Gracias. Lo tengo acá en la pantalla. Okay, el resultado.
The result of the vote is as follows: 59 in favor, 5 against, abstentions 29. So the working group has decided to grant accreditation to the Syrian Expatriates Medical Association. Before giving the floor for explanations of vote after the vote, may I remind delegations that explanations of vote are limited to 10 minutes and should be made by delegations from their seats. Does any delegation wish to make a general statement after the vote? It appears that that is not the case. Very well. Well, let's move on to item 5 of the agenda then.
Tema 5.
Under item 5 are measures to enhance the promotion and protection of human rights of older persons. I now invite the working group to resume its consideration of agenda item 5, entitled Measures to Enhance the Promotion and Protection of the Human Rights of Older Persons. Before I call on the first speaker on the list, I would like to remind delegations that to strictly adhere to the 3-minute time limit for national statements on behalf of one member state and 5 minutes for statements that are made on behalf of a group of states. The list of speakers has been distributed to the delegations and has been published in today's journal. Now, in view of the current risk mitigation measures, delegations are kindly invited to send any requests for changes to the list of speakers or any questions related to the working group email. So the speakers list has been closed. Now let us begin the general debate. The first speaker of this afternoon will be Namibia. Namibia, you have the floor.
Algeria?
It's old list.
Okay.
It's not updated. Madam Chair, I wish to commend you and your Bureau for ably steering the work of this group in what has undoubtedly been a challenging year. In 2020, we were unable to meet as a result of the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we look forward to continuing the work of this group, the importance of which has been underscored by the pandemic. Madam Chairperson, Namibia is pleased to have in place one of the most comprehensive social protection systems in Africa, matched by a strong financial commitment. Prior to the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, the government devoted a steadily growing proportion of public spending to social protection. These social protection schemes provide cash transfers and complementary social assistance to a range of vulnerable groups, including the elderly. In this regard, our government provides a monthly grant to all individuals over the age of 60. These grants have proven highly effective at reducing poverty and inequality and mitigating the impact of high unemployment, although these remain persistent challenges. The government of Namibia is increased investments in social protection, health and education contributed to the reduction of inequalities and opportunities and incomes and to the development of a comprehensive and inclusive national social protection system. Madam Chair, in spite of the relative comprehensiveness of the Namibian social protection system, important gaps remain. Many issues continue to face older persons in Namibia, including violence, particularly towards elder women. In Africa, aging is a phenomenon that is just beginning to reveal its shape. Most governments, including the Namibian government, recognize the fact that the number of older persons is on the increase. As such, the government embarked on a consultative process with a view to formulating a guiding national policy framework using a balanced approach to the issues of older persons that incorporates both a developmental and human rights-based approach. The overall objective of this policy is to ensure senior citizens' rights, protection and care, and mainstream aging, in all national issues, policies, and legislation. The concerns of older persons have been deliberated upon in various national and international documents, such as the Namibian Constitution and National Development Plans, among others. The outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic caused untold suffering for older people across the world. As we all know, the fatality rate for older people is higher overall, and for those over 80, it is 5 times the global average. Beyond its immediate health impact, the pandemic also put older people at greater risk of poverty, discrimination, and isolation. We must ensure that all older persons at risk of acquiring COVID-19, especially those with underlying health conditions and those living alone, are identified and attended to so as early as possible, especially when it comes to ensuring access to vaccinations. We must further ensure the continuity of adequate care services for older persons and, importantly, strengthen services to prevent and protect older persons, particularly older women, from any form of violence and abuse, such as domestic violence and neglect. I thank you.
I want to thank Namibia for your statement. As the list of speakers has undergone some changes, I'm going to list the 4 countries, Nepal, Bhutan, Thailand, Bosnia, Herzegovina. Those are the 4 that I have on the list for the time being. Nepal, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, at the outset, I'd like to congratulate you and other Bureau members on your election to steer the 11th session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, and I assure you of my delegation's full support. Madam Chair, old persons are highly vulnerable to COVID-19 pandemic as they have higher mortality rate. Furthermore, they are also vulnerable to indirect impact of the pandemic, including social isolation, food insecurity, deprivation of care and support, and economic instability. Although the world has always strived for people's longevity and invested in healthy aging, we were still least prepared to take care and protect older persons during the pandemic. Madam Chair, in Nepal, we have a tradition of generations living under the same roof and helping each other. The tradition of joint family system has proved to be a great support to over 8% of over 60 years of population and their family members in Nepal. The Constitution of Nepal guarantees protection and social security of senior citizens. The Senior Citizens Act of Nepal makes it mandatory for sons and daughters or other family members in succession to support older persons. The government continued social protection schemes and programs designed to support older persons even during the pandemic. The non-contributory old age pension scheme, which started in 1996, has become a steady source of income and independence and self-esteem of senior citizens. The government also provides financial support for the treatment of cancer, Alzheimer, kidney failure, Parkinson, and spinal injury, and this benefit is mostly used for old age persons. And geriatric beds are arranged in the zonal hospitals where the older persons get 50% discount in treatment charges. And Madam Chair, the pandemic has taught us a lesson that we need to empower and protect older persons, especially during the crisis, to protect their lives and dignity. A blanket approach to old persons' health and long-term care, safety and security, and their rights does not work. We need to consider their specific age, medical conditions, gender, disabilities, and socioeconomic background. In conclusion, Madam Chair, Nepal remains committed to addressing the economic and social inequalities, promoting the rights of older persons, and ensuring their dignity. We look forward to working constructively with the international community to achieve these goals. I thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, The 2020 session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging was perhaps one of the earliest casualties of the pandemic-induced disruptions to the rhythm of our multilateral calendar. We appreciate the significant intercessional efforts undertaken to maintain continuity of our work. One cannot, however, help but draw parallels between the pandemic's impact on the work of the only UN subsidiary mechanism focused on strengthening the protection of human rights of older persons and the devastating impact that it has had on this particular segment of our societies. Within the framework of Bhutan's development approach of gross national happiness, valuing the role and contributions of older persons as rights holders, active contributors to our economies, and as agents of solidarity and social cohesion is an important facet that cuts across all 9 domains that guide elaboration of public policies in Bhutan. The principles of state policy directly address the role of government in fostering a civil society free of oppression, discrimination, violence, and based on the rule of law, where the human rights, fundamental freedoms, and the dignity of all Bhutanese are guaranteed. The Constitution further mandates that all Bhutanese are guaranteed free public health care, including referrals overseas supported by the state. The COVID-19 pandemic has placed older persons in a position of greater insecurity with disproportionate threat to their lives and well-being. In recognition, Bhutan joined the joint statement on the UN Secretary-General's policy brief on the impact of COVID-19 on older persons in May 2020. In Bhutan, the needs of older persons have received targeted attention throughout the pandemic. All those above the age of 60 have been registered by the Ministry of Health for personalized outreach and to ensure their health needs are uninterrupted and receive priority. During the nationwide lockdown period, on command of His Majesty the King, multivitamins and essential food rations were delivered to all Bhutanese above the age of 70. Annual flu vaccination campaigns for the elderly continue. In the context of our nationwide COVID-19 vaccine rollout, which was launched on 27th March, a targeted vaccination program is currently underway for all Bhutanese over the age of 70, with door-to-door service for those with mobility issues. I'm so pleased to share that in a testament to vaccine equity and access and to leaving no one behind, with over 56.4% of our eligible population vaccinated with their first doses as of this morning, Bhutan is well on track to achieve 100% coverage of all eligible persons, irrespective of nationality. Traditional family units and household structures in Bhutan embrace older persons, and while assisted living facilities are atypical under the Senior Citizens Program of His Majesty the King's Kidu program, a number of residential centers with medical facilities are being established in various parts of the country, with a few already operational for senior citizens who do not have family members to look after them. Under the program, senior citizens in need also receive monthly stipends. In recognition of the needs of our increasingly aging population, civil society in Bhutan has come forward with robust initiatives. The Tarayana Foundation has programs for elderly people through an integrated rural development approach to provide basic needs in many districts and even supports religious pilgrimages. The Royal Society for Senior Citizens has initiated a number of activities to empower older persons through programs to strengthen autonomy and independence. They have been a strong advocate for elder-friendly access for public services at financial institutions, healthcare facilities, public transport, and for electoral participation. Other initiatives include youth mentorship programs, free legal advisory services, and support for cultural enrichment programs. Madam Chair, in conclusion, I extend my delegation's congratulations to you and members of the Bureau on your election. Bhutan stands ready to join hands with you and members of the Open-Ended Working Group to strengthen the human rights and fundamental freedoms of older persons, to enable them to live in dignity, lead safe, healthy, and fulfilling lives as full members of society. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Thailand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At the outset, I wish to reiterate Thailand's commitment to the protection and promotion of the rights and well-being of older persons in line with the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging. With aging population, Thailand aims to create an inclusive society where older persons can live with dignity and enjoy quality of life, not less than people in other age groups. Several programs have therefore been introduced to ensure that basic needs of older persons are met and necessary support sufficiently provided. The government offers old age allowance and other financial support measures to older persons, while their access to health services is secure through our National Universal Health Coverage Scheme. Thailand also encourages lifelong learning for older persons through the establishment of vocational training centers, learning centers, and schools designed specifically for older persons. Older persons can also seek affordable funding for their business venture through Elderly Fund. During our ASEAN chairmanship in 2019, Thailand played an active role in supporting the establishment of ASEAN Center for Active Aging and Innovation. The center serves as a resource facility on active aging and welcomes collaboration with international partners to help the region prepare for an aging society. Madam Chair, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on older persons as they are more prone to physical illness, mental health condition, unemployment, and poverty. For our national effort, Thailand introduced a guideline on caregiving for older persons during the pandemic, as well as measures for infection control in elderly care facility. Moreover, our long-term investment in social programs, including universal health coverage, have proved to pay off in protecting the welfare and well-being of older persons in the time of COVID-19. To leave no one behind, we must take into account the needs of older persons in our COVID-19 response and recovery. Older persons must be recognized as an agent of the society, contributing to our effort to build back better and achieve 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Madam Chair, Thailand believes that this session will help us reflect the way forward to bridge the remaining gaps in order to better protect and empower older persons so that they could enjoy a safe and dignified life in the society. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you to Thailand. Now I give the floor to the representative of Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, friends, and colleagues. Let me start by honoring the progress made by this open-ended working group over the past years and welcome the opportunity to present insights from Bosnia and Herzegovina on this important issue. Bosnia and Herzegovina reaffirms its commitment to age-inclusive implementation 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and acknowledge major changes faced by older adults which erode their social, economic, and cultural participation. Over the past year, COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated challenges older individuals face across Bosnia and Herzegovina, particularly in the following areas. First is the limited access to information tailored to older adults. National media often struggle to navigate incoming reports and bring factual and timely information to said age group. At the same time, reports stated the age of an individual in order to diminish the perceived danger of a coronavirus, showing a lack of empathy for elderly victims. Second challenge facing older individuals in Bosnia and Herzegovina is the rise of ageism and domestic violence towards the elderly, which is exceptionally prevalent during the social isolation and lockdowns. In almost 60% of elder abuse and neglected incidents, the perpetrator is a family member, making it harder for this type of abuse to be recognized or reported by the wider community. Lastly, I would like to call attention to an issue facing older individuals, as in many countries at a disproportionate rate in the pandemic, and that is depression. According to the recent studies, depression in older adults lasts longer, and it's often manifested through peculiar symptoms, making it hard to diagnose. Depression in the people 65 and older is a major public health problem, especially combined with the prolonged time of social isolations, driving up suicide rates in this age group. Madam Chair, having in mind our aforementioned facts, older adults in Bosnia-Herzegovina are recognized as a group at risk, having precedence when it comes to coronavirus vaccination and treatment. Social challenges the group in question is facing are significantly facilitated through active efforts across the institution of public health and social protection program. Bosnia-Herzegovina firmly supports the goals outlined in the Madrid Plan of Action and Aging and ingeminates its commitment to work with a fellow member nation on protecting the rights of one of the most vulnerable groups among us. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Bosnia-Herzegovina, and I now give the floor to the representative of Canada.
Madame la Présidente, merci beaucoup.
Madam Chair, thank you. COVID-19 pandemic has affected older persons disproportionately. Not only are older people the one group where you have the most serious cases and the highest rate of mortality, they are also particularly affected by the various measures implemented by governments to limit the spread of the virus. The case of older women, older persons with low income, or those with a disability, or those who are members of an indigenous community or LGBTs, the risk of being affected negatively by the pandemic is even higher. Well, we're trying to contain the spread of the virus and mitigate its impact. It has become clear that effective solutions must be adapted to gender-specific solutions and should take into account the respect for people's rights.
To be respected and to live in dignity. The COVID-19 outbreaks in long-term care homes have highlighted in Canada and around the world critical gaps in standards and in care. Various reports have shed light on unacceptable and disheartening situations. Seniors are too often victims of neglect and in some cases various forms of abuse. We've all felt this personally in the last several months, as we've seen so many instances where people have simply been warehoused and left to die. Moving forward, the Government of Canada will work with the provinces and territories who have a singular responsibility in this regard to set new national standards for long-term care so that seniors get the best support possible. The federal government will focus on addressing gaps in long-term care facilities, which includes the working conditions of personal support workers. It will also work to amend the criminal code to penalize those who neglect seniors under their care, putting them in danger. We've also found in Canada that the pandemic has impacted the financial security of older persons. Those with low incomes often rely on benefits to pay for necessities like rent and food. To protect older persons' income security in this difficult time, the federal government in Canada introduced measures such as a one-time tax-free payment for seniors, as well as an additional one-time tax-free payment for particularly vulnerable seniors. These benefits are helping low-income seniors with extra costs during the pandemic. Madam Chair, community organizations in our country are very important partners in mitigating the impacts of the pandemic on older adults. We're proud to support their work through initiatives like the New Horizons for Seniors program, which funds community-based projects that contribute, for example, to reducing the social isolation of older adults, helping them maintain a social support network, or by raising awareness of senior abuse. These projects also improve the ability of organizations to address cultural diversity and the needs of vulnerable groups, such as Indigenous seniors, seniors in rural and remote areas, LGBT seniors, and seniors with disabilities. The Government of Canada will also continue to work with partners across levels of government and civil society to raise awareness of the UN Decade of Healthy Aging, to encourage action and leverage global efforts that foster healthy aging and combat ageism. Preparing for and supporting an aging population is also vital to the achievement of the integrated 2030 agenda, with aging cutting across the goals on poverty eradication, good health, gender equality, economic growth, decent work, reduced inequalities, and sustainable cities. Canada is very much committed to advancing the Sustainable Development Goals, working in particular to ensure that vulnerable populations are not left behind. Madam Chair, we wish to take this opportunity to celebrate and learn from the leadership of many older persons. Something I would just say as an aside, I point out to my staff every day, because that's me, who are also serving in their communities as volunteers, actively engaging in political processes, and holding power to account as human rights defenders. Despite the challenges, older persons are making their voices heard. It is now up to us as decision makers to listen to their perspectives. En conclusion, il est nécessaire.
In conclusion, it is necessary to tackle the issue of exclusion and vulnerabilities to which older people are confronted in order to make progress towards implementing the SDGs. While we are implementing a recovery or rebuilding, we can choose to better rebuild and to take up the challenges to which too many older people are faced with. Canada is determined to cooperate with our international partners to build a world where no one is left behind and where no older person is left behind. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. And I give the floor to Sri Lanka. Microphone, please. The speaker is not using a live mic.
When we consider the idea of human capital, equality and progress, it is almost normal to think to the future and focus on shaping a world that is friendly, accepting, and beneficial to the children and youth of today. But in this very pursuit of creating a better tomorrow, we must be cognizant to include those who forged our today, those who helped to create the very groundwork within which we operate, our aging population. Madam Chair, between 2019 and 2030, the number of persons aged 60 years and over is projected to grow by 38%, from 1 billion to 1.4 billion, globally outnumbering youth. This increase will be the greatest and the most rapid in the developing world. As such, it is imperative on us to heed greater attention to the specific challenges affecting older persons and recognize the essential contributions that older persons can continue to make to the well-being of societies and towards the achievement of the SDGs. Sri Lanka has, in 2017, put in place a national health policy for elderly. In Sri Lanka, the elderly population is increasing, and we recognize that we'll be faced with several related challenges. That is why the development policy articulated by our government titled Vistas of Prosperity and Splendor, a roadmap for the prosperity for our country, and built upon the foundation of happy families, includes a section for a society with respected senior citizens. Sri Lankan culture traditionally assigns high priority for the care of the elderly by the family, and this is legally sanctioned. However, the development policy augments these traditions and provides for priority welfare measures for the elderly in ensuring their ability to live with dignity. Madam Chair, many developing countries are confronted with a number of health issues outside of the COVID-19 pandemic, and older persons would be a vulnerable group that is most affected. In this context, we welcome the 2021-2030 has been declared as the decade of healthy aging. In Sri Lanka, we pride ourselves on every citizen's right to free and universal health care, regardless of gender, regardless of race, economic status. Our aging population enjoy equal rights to basic health care, thereby preserving one's right to health and the quality of life. Madam Chair, we must go beyond preserving rights to being one step ahead of the issues our elderly will face, both now and in the future. It is vital that we forward-thinking and create policy and legal frameworks that will be more effectively address the economic and social issues our aging population face. Old age, Madam Chair, challenges our self-identity. This vulnerable and transient sense of self needs to affirm itself to feel secure by holding on to whatever it can, getting enough of what it wants and avoiding enough of what it doesn't want. For a variety of reasons, this tends to become more difficult with aging, and there is commonly a growing sense of powerlessness and a loss of control over our lives. This exposes the root fear, the sense of wanting that lies at the heart of the human condition, but which in earlier years we are better placed to keep covered up. Ours is an upfront culture of individualism with attitude. Get a life. In a culture which places a high value on independence, standing up and standing out, physical and financial dependence can induce feelings of failure and inadequacy. In the area of gender and sexuality, to be a real man or a real woman is commonly important in sustaining a strong self-identity. Isn't this something that must be addressed if we are to recognize the humanity in our old? Finally, Madam Chair, Sri Lanka remains deeply concerned about the multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination that continues to create vulnerabilities for older persons and affect their right to a dignified life. We commit ourselves as responsible members of the international community to promote and protect the equal rights and the quality of life of our aging population. May I wind up by recalling what Gibran said, quote, "The things which the child loves remain in the domain of the heart until old age. The most beautiful thing in life is that our souls remain hovering over the places where we once enjoyed ourselves. I am one of those who remembers those places regardless of distance or time." And as someone else said to most of us who are advanced in our years, relish love in our old age. Aged love is like aged wine. It becomes more satisfying, more refreshing, more valuable, more appreciated, and more intoxicating. Think about it. There is only one time in our lives when we all have a chance to be old and hopefully wise. Getting old, Madam Chair, is a fascinating thing. The older you get, the older you want to get. Finally, let us not neglect the celebration of old age, which gets less prominence in our culture than either the bad news or the ever-youthful evasions of it. What we celebrate is the accumulated wisdom of just having lived so long, as opposed to the negativity of ageism. This is our contribution to a fast-moving culture which is becoming increasingly disorientated. It would be a pity to have had the good fortune to have lived to be so old and yet to remain trapped in whom we were, without being able to step out into the new life that awaits us. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, His Excellency Muhan Keris, Representative of Sri Lanka. I now give the floor to Mr. Enrique Manalo, Permanent Representative of the Philippines.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. The Philippines reaffirms its commitment to advance the rights and well-being of older persons. This is especially important now given the untold suffering that COVID-19 has brought upon older persons throughout the world. Data shows in this connection that rates of mortality and severe disease from COVID-19 infection may be 5 times higher in persons over 80. The Philippines is also concerned that the pandemic has exacerbated age discrimination and stigmatization of older persons, as well as neglect and elder abuse. Measures to stem the spread of the pandemic has further intensified existing challenges faced by older persons in accessing health care and social services. The Philippines is therefore committed to promoting actively and respecting the rights of older persons to effectively benefit from COVID-19 recovery measures. Madam Chair, the rights of older persons are guaranteed in the Philippine Constitution and are further elaborated in the expanded Senior Citizens Act, which recognizes the rights of older persons to continue to contribute to nation building. This law created the Office of Senior Citizens Affairs in every local government unit, as well as a national coordinating and monitoring board. It also mandates free pensions for senior citizens living in poverty, as well as a 20% discount for all senior citizens for food, leisure, medical, and dental and transportation facilities. The value-added tax has also been removed from medications for diabetes, high cholesterol, and hypertension, common health concerns of the elderly. Unconditional cash transfers to indigent senior citizens as a social protection measure has also been provided. The Philippines recognizes the rights of older persons to education and lifelong learning. Senior citizens are included in training programs, as well as programs that provide them with scholarships, grants, aids, subsidies, and other incentives to pursue further education. The Philippine government also ensures universal health care for senior citizens. It also established the National Policy on the Health and Wellness Program for Senior Citizens, the Long-Term Care for Senior Citizens, and the National Policy on Palliative and Hospice Care. The Philippines strongly believes that conscious efforts should be undertaken to correct negative stereotypes and prejudicial attitudes towards older persons. They are agents of change, not only beneficiaries of social protection. Media also has a very important role to play in combating ageism by depicting older persons as strong, active, and productive individuals. The Philippines encourages all states to support an international binding instrument that will define the normative elements of the rights of older persons, especially older women, to enable healthy aging through supportive and gender-responsive institutions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank the representative of Sri Lanka for that statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Julio Cesar Arriola, Permanent Representative of Paraguay. Madam Chair, Excellencies, colleagues, the Republic of Paraguay aligns itself with the statement of Chile on behalf of the Group of Friends of Older Persons. Madam Chair, the global population is aging, and this demographic change will become more noticeable and swifter in developing countries, resulting in a changing pattern which will place new demands upon health systems across the world and will push societies to address the need for true integral inclusion of older persons. In Paraguay, the integral protection of older persons is enshrined in the national constitution, as well as in specific laws guaranteeing people over 60 years old the right to the ability to exercise their rights upon the basis of universality, integrity, equity, and participation, with the aim of contributing to improving the quality and level of life through services and integral social management. Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, the health, social and economic crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic hits older people particularly hard. They are exposed to a significantly higher risk of mortality and serious illness once infected, due very much to the higher incidence of underlying conditions in this age group. Since the arrival of COVID-19 in Paraguay, we have been focusing on trying to mitigate its impact through various decrees, including a communication particularly aimed at older persons regarding elements linked to telehealth appointments for both physical and mental health, access to recreational areas, seeking to create areas exclusively restricted to this age group or within restricted certain distances, as just some of the measures which we have been taking with the aim of protecting our older persons, particularly from a health point of view. In this regard, we have developed various protocols for inpatients in hospitals or those living in public or private housing for older persons. The current challenge is immunization, and it is therefore imperative that all countries in the world have vaccines available, particularly those countries facing greater vulnerability and developing countries. In this regard, and in closing, we call upon the multilateral system and producer countries to ensure global and equitable access to vaccines and their recognition as a global public health good. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor, and thank you to colleagues for your attention. I thank the distinguished representative of Paraguay, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Omar Hilal, Permanent Representative of Morocco. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. On behalf of Her Excellency the Minister of Social Solidarity, Equality and the Family in Morocco, I should like to make the following statement. Madam Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, based upon the policy adopted by the Kingdom of Morocco on development, to ensure the interdependence and solidarity between various components of society, and given the religious and cultural foundation and cultural and social specificities of Morocco, and in line with the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030, the Kingdom of Morocco wishes to continue with full responsibility to lay the foundations of a society in solidarity where everybody enjoys feelings of security, liberty, equality and equal opportunities, as well as social justice. This applies to men, women, young people, older persons, or others. Given this political will, led by His Majesty Mohammed VI, and in the light of socio-demographic developments underway in Morocco, and with a view to anticipating challenges resulting from ageing, just like all countries, Morocco has taken a number of measures to meet the increasing needs of this particular age group. In this regard, Morocco has a whole legal arsenal open to it for older persons, directly or indirectly. And this covers the various areas: social protection in all its aspects, or social care, including organizing the profession of social workers. In addition, a national observatory for older persons has been set up, as a national mechanism to raise awareness about this issue and to encourage scientific research into issues affecting older persons. This also has a view of ensuring monitoring of their situation through a specific index and also through annual reports which are drawn up, as well as studies and research into this topic. In the context of the implementation of the government programme 2017 to 2021, this has a fourth pillar regarding the promotion of human development and social cohesion. And with a view to establishing a national policy specifically for older persons and to adopt a systemic framework for state action and civil society action so as to guarantee decent lives and lives which are respectful of the dignity of older persons, the government has adopted its integrated policy for the improvement of the situation of older persons. This with a view of safeguarding their rights and to meeting their needs and their aspirations, whilst respecting their dignity and bolstering their independence. These efforts are structured around 4 strategic axes. First of all, generalization of social coverage and prevention against risks linked to aging. Secondly, establishing a capacity building environment, and thirdly, promoting social, cultural and political access and participation for older persons, and finally, developing knowledge and legislative tools. These 4 axes will be implemented through 15 strategic objectives and 98 executive measures. As part of the national measures aimed at slowing the spread of the pandemic, all older persons have been vaccinated in Morocco as part of a free vaccination campaign against the pandemic. And this dimension of the global protection of older persons happened in line with directives from His Majesty the King Mohammed VI. To conclude, thanks to our legislation, policies and public programs, as well as our international commitments, including the Sustainable Development Goals in 2030, Morocco is very much concerned with integrating the rights of older persons into the very heart of the development process, so as to create a healthy climate which they can be integrated in and can thus participate fully in the life of society. Thank you very much. We thank the distinguished representative of Morocco for that statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Algeria, Ms. Sofiani Memaouni.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, allow me to thank Her Excellency Ambassador Maria del Carmen Squef, Permanent Representative of Argentina, for her leadership during this session and assure her of my delegation's support for a successful outcome. This year's theme is timely and relevant as it provides us with the opportunity to discuss policies and measures with the aim to enhance the promotion and protection of the human rights and dignity of older persons. Madam Chairperson, at the time of the adoption of the Madrid Plan of Action, we committed to respond and tackle the issue of population and aging in the 21st century to create a society for all ages. It is high time to accelerate the implementation of this plan of action, as it is expected that by the year 2050, the global population over 60 years old will double, with the vast majority of older people living in low and middle income countries. We must therefore address their needs and ensure their well-being. We also need to recognize the essential contribution that older persons make to the development of our societies, and that despite significant progress in the development and implementation of policies in this regard, many challenges facing older persons still persist. We believe that the United Nations Secretariat and the UN entities and programs should support further the work of the open-ended working group in identifying and filling these gaps by providing all necessary measures to ensure substantive and fruitful sessions and enable it to fulfill its existing mandate. Madam Chairperson, it is often said that the nation's greatness is measured by how it treats its elders. In Algeria, we strive to treat them with respect, dedication, care, and inclusion. Indeed, the Algerian Constitution, in its Article 7, Paragraph 6, provides the state with the duty to ensure the protection and the assistance to older persons. That is why the Algerian government has adopted a set of laws and policies to respond to the need of older persons, including their needs for housing, employment, healthcare, infrastructure, and social protection, among other aspects related to the fulfillment of their basic human rights. The Algerian law relating to the protection of the elderly provides various mechanisms and regulatory provisions to assist the elderly through several measures, including institutional placement of poor elderly people or without family ties, encouraging the elderly to remain in their family environment through specific and adapted care and home assistance for destitute-dependent elderly people, and encouraging the contribution of older persons in public affairs and in economic, social, and cultural lives. Cognizant of the fact that COVID-19 pandemic is causing untold fear and suffering for older people, and in order to protect this category of the society, the Algerian authority have started the vaccination since January 2021 by giving priority to older people and those who suffer from chronic diseases. Furthermore, it is worth noting that in Algeria, the protection and preservation of the dignity of the elderly is a national obligation that falls in the first place on the family, in particular the descendants supported by the state and civil society. Descendants who do not have sufficient material and financial means to do so are entitled to state's aid program to keep the elders in their natural environment and surrounded by their family. Alongside their families and the government institutions, 3,746 social and humanitarian associations are involved in the collective efforts to protect and assist the elderly through the establishment of care centers dedicated to this category of population. All the measures and policy adopted by the governments toward the elderly are monitored, strengthened, and evaluated by a national committee for the elderly mandated to ensure the protection and well-being of the elderly and guarantee that their needs and their rights are properly addressed. Finally, allow me to conclude, Madam Chair, by reiterating the commitment of Algeria to work with the international community and all stakeholders to ensure the well-being of older persons in order to promote their social integration and the enjoyment of their human rights and fostering their intergenerational solidarity. And I thank you.
Agradecemos. We thank the distinguished permanent representative of Algeria for that statement, and now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Bing Dai, Deputy Permanent Representative of
Madam Chair, China wishes to congratulate you on your election as chair of the working group. Population aging is an important trend of social development. The pandemic threatens the elderly more, requiring vigorous societal response in general. Respecting the elderly is a traditional virtue of China. On promoting the cause for the elderly, China wishes to share the following points. Number one, fully protect the elderly's right to life and health. As the most vulnerable, they are most likely to be infected in the pandemic. China prioritizes the protection of people, their safety and life at all costs, despite the age and illness of patients, and this has been the guiding principle in this process. In the hardest-hit Hubei province, about 70% of the patients aged over 70 were cured, the oldest being 108 years old. 2. Digital literacy for the elderly. Digital technology brings convenience and challenges to the life of the elderly. The Chinese government formulated a plan on smart technology for the elderly last November. Tackling issues frequented daily by the elderly, using traditional practice, new technology, and smart solutions and services friendly to the elderly. For instance, more specially designed mobile phones and walk pathways for their ease of use. 3. Jointly build a society friendly to the elderly. To build back better after the pandemic is an opportunity to improve the policy on caring for the elderly and our social security system. More training and education opportunities are being offered to extend their active working years and get employed, even to become entrepreneurs. Improved legal system and legal aid encourage them to safeguard their legitimate rights and interests according to law. And 4, vigorously promote international cooperation on aging. The international community should faithfully implement the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, pay particular attention to the special difficulties of developing countries, and increase financial and technical assistance. Extensive engagement and consensus should be the basis on which to explore the feasibility of formulating new international legal instruments. Madam Chair, China is one of the countries with a large aging population. In 2019, China had 254 million people aged over 60, or 18.1% of the total population. The elderly population is expected to exceed 300 million in 5 years, starting the middle stage of population aging. The Chinese government, attaching great importance to population aging, has implemented a series of policies, including the National Medium and Long-Term Plan for actively responding to population aging, as a timely, scientific, and comprehensive response to the issue, so that all the elderly can enjoy a happy and decent life with support and help. China will work with all countries to strengthen international cooperation and promote a coordinated approach to population aging and socio-economic development for a community of shared destiny for humanity. Thank you, Madam Chair.
We thank the representative of China for that statement and now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Désiré Wolfran-Ipo, Deputy Permanent Representative of Côte d'Ivoire.
Madame la Présidente, permettez-moi.
Madam Chair, at the outset, allow me to congratulate your Bureau and yourself for your election and the successful conduct of this session's work, and to assure you of my delegation's full support in your mission. Madam Chair, my country welcomes the holding of this 11th session, which once again it gives us the opportunity to recall the unwavering determination of His Excellency Mr. Alassane Ouattara, President of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire and the Ivorian government, to promote and protect the rights of his people, particularly older persons, whose contribution to the economic development of our countries is undeniable. According to the United Nations, the number of older persons is estimated at almost 700 million in the world and is likely to reach a record level of 2 billion by 2050. In these circumstances, taking this age group into account is a major element in achieving the SDGs and the United Nations wish to leave no one behind. Indeed, older persons must not be seen as a burden for society, but rather a source of wealth. Madam Chair, the population of older persons in Côte d'Ivoire is growing and is estimated at 4.4% of the population as a whole. We have established a constitutional norm to protect the rights of this age group and taken the necessary measures to implement the Madrid International Action Plan on Aging adopted in 2002. In this regard, and with the support of the American government, my country has set up a program called Pro-Justice, which aims to strengthen the judicial system by improving access to justice for persons with a disability, including older persons. Moreover, universal health coverage, which has come into force since October 2019, should allow us to ensure that all older persons have access to affordable health care and services. Reform undertaken in the social security sector since 2012 has allowed an improvement in the offerings to insured persons in this age group. There are salary replacements currently granted within a reasonable amount of time, and pensions, and significant efforts have been made in order to ensure better coverage for social security both in the public and private sectors. The government's social programme, through its Productive Social Safety Net programme, allowed in 2019 127,000 households to benefit from cash transfers, and also support measures to create income-generating activities. The government intends to reach 227,000 households. 2020, Madam Chair, was marked by the global health crisis linked to COVID-19, which had harmful consequences on the social and economic lives of our people, particularly older persons, as stated by the Secretary-General on the 1st of May 2020 on the launch of the Summary Note on Older Persons. It highlighted essentially that the COVID-19 pandemic resulted for older persons in innumerable fears and sufferings alongside the immediate health consequences and the increased risk of poverty, discrimination and isolation which the pandemic exposes them to. In order to effectively combat the spread of the virus and its consequences, the Ivorian government has established a health response plan of 95,880 million FCFA, that's 173,767 million American dollars, aiming to break the chain of transmission of the illness and to guarantee the best possible care for sufferers, with a particular emphasis on older persons. As well as this, the government has set up a number of aid funds to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on economic and social life. These funds are estimated at 942.546 million American dollars and should allow for greater resilience on a national scale. It's important to note that the vaccination campaign in my country against COVID-19 began on the 1st of March 2021, with those over 60 as the priority target group. To conclude, Madam Chair, Côte d'Ivoire hopes that with the support of bilateral and multilateral partners, all the projects and programmes created for older persons will contribute to ensuring a more fulfilled life for them. I thank you.
Agradecemos especialmente.
I want to thank the distinguished representative of Côte d'Ivoire, and now I'd like to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Abdab Aziz, Deputy Permanent Representative of Malaysia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic are felt by everyone, regardless of age. However, older persons are impacted more given the challenges and constraints caused by the pandemic. During the imposition of lockdown measures, gaps in digital literacy, for example, creates challenges for older persons in terms of digitalization of work and access to services. In fulfilling the government's commitment to create a conducive environment for older persons, Malaysia's Plan of Action for Older Persons is now under review for implementation from 2022 to 2030. This revision takes into consideration key findings of a study on facilities and services to meet the future needs of older persons post-COVID-19. The government is also nearing completion of a study on the need to formulate a specific act for older persons. In Malaysia, existing laws that protect human rights cover all age of groups, with special focus to the elderly, therefore allowing older persons to acquire access to justice and seek redress. The Department of Social Welfare and Public Complaints Bureau readily facilitates the process for older persons to lodge complaints or reports on infringement of their rights. Besides this, older persons may reach out for help via a dedicated helpline for the public, the Talian Kasih. This helpline is also able to link older persons to agencies and departments that provide the necessary support needed, including legal assistance. Madam Chair, the focus of healthy aging allows older persons to be productive members of society. In 2019, the government launched a National Strategic Development Plan on Aging Population, which focuses on inclusion and employment of Malaysia's aging population. This plan aims to foster interest in both employment and volunteering, tackling issues that limit older persons' willingness to seek work and improving the employability and access of older persons to fair job placement both in salaried work and volunteering opportunities. The government is also in the midst of expanding the function of several activity centres for older persons to include job matching services and business empowerment activities for older persons. Besides this, intergenerational programs are being held to tap into the inherent knowledge and wisdom of older persons for the younger generation to gain from. Madam Chair, despite the pandemic, efforts in building age-friendly cities still continue. It is with this hope that a conducive environment for all will be enjoyed by everyone, particularly for older persons and those that are blessed with old age. Thank you.
I want to thank the Deputy Permanent Representative of Malaysia for his statement. And I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Feridun Sinin Laulu, Permanent Representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At the outset, allow me to congratulate you on your election and thank for organizing this session. We express Turkey's full support and cooperation in the current session during its deliberations. Aging is a global trend that touches on each and every country in the world. Like rest of the world, the population of Turkey is aging at a very fast pace. Over the last 5 years, the number of older persons has increased by 22.5%. The share of older persons in total population in Turkey has risen from 8.2% in 2015 to 9.5%, approximately 8 million people in 2020. COVID-19 pandemic has put the rights and conditions of older persons under spotlight everywhere. During the pandemic, we have continued to provide long-term care and support services, in addition to others, to make sure that older persons have the same rights as others, and that these rights are equally protected. As a result of effective measures taken in all long-term care institutions, we have managed to keep the adverse effects of the pandemic to a minimum, especially for older persons. Some of these measures were adopted even before the outbreak of COVID-19 in Turkey. They include observation of older persons for 14 days after the discharge from a hospital in newly opened social isolation care institutions, 14-day shift system for care staff, and prioritize older persons in access to health care. Turkey's National Action Plan on Aging and Situation of Older Persons that dates back to 2007, and it covers a wide spectrum of rights of older persons in line with the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging. The services provided for aging people include long-term care in nursing homes, daycare, allowances for home care, and social cash assistance. Elderly support program that is being implemented since 2016 supports elderly people in their living environments and home care services. 2019 was declared as the Year of Older Persons in Turkey. In this context, the first International Council on Aging was held on 22 February 2019 in Ankara, Turkey. As a multi-stakeholder event, the Council provided opportunity for exchange of ideas and good practices amongst governments, civil society organizations, and international institutions on aging, care economy, care services, and on the ways and means to improve quality of life of older persons and their rights. Last but not least, the declaration of 2020 as Year of Accessibility in Turkey helped raise awareness on the countrywide promotion of accessible environments, as well as on increased quality of goods and services to be provided for older persons. Finally, Madam Chair, Turkey attaches great importance to the promotion and protection of human rights and dignity of older persons. We also believe the open-ended working group has an important role to play to advance our common agenda on this understanding. We wish fruitful and result-oriented discussions to that end. Thank you.
Agradecemos la intervención.
I thank the distinguished representative of Turkey for his statement. I would now like to give the floor to the Deputy Permanent Representative of Cuba, Ambassador Ana Silvia Rodriguez. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to congratulate you on being appointed to chair the open-ended working group on aging. The work of this group is extremely important for my country, Madam Chair. The aging of our population is one of the most complex socio-demographic challenges that are confronting our countries. Thanks to the work of the revolution in favor of the health and well-being of our population, today the life expectancy in Cuba is 78.45 years, and towards 2030 it is expected that 30% of our population is 60 years or older. These positive results imply significant challenges for small developing countries such as Cuba, which has been subject to 6 decades of a economic, commercial, and financial blockade by the United States, which has been stepped up during the pandemic, in fact, and directly affects older adults and complicates addressing their specific needs. So with that in mind, the protection and care of older adults as a shared responsibility between the family, the community, and the state is one of our current efforts to to update our model of development, to streamline our legal institutional framework of the country, respond to the pandemic, and to recover from it. Madam Chair, before COVID-19, older adults were already the usual victims of poverty, malnutrition, lack of medical care, and the prohibitive costs of medication and economic precarity. However, this socioeconomic crisis generated by the pandemic risks significantly worsening the situation of millions of older adults, including in highly developed countries, because the programs of protection and social security are usually the first to be sacrificed in measures of fiscal austerity. Therefore, in this context, we should promote respect for the human rights of old age and create an environment that empowers all the capacities, autonomy, and independence of older adults. With this purpose, we support efforts aimed at developing a legally binding international instrument that is broad and comprehensive to promote and protect the rights and the dignity of older persons. This would make it possible to deal more in depth and more broadly on issues that are not sufficiently dealt with under current standards, including those that can be found in human rights conventions of the United Nations and those developed by the practice of human rights treaty bodies. Cuba has every intention of participating in these efforts with the goal of contributing to an aging that rhymes with quality of life and dignity for all. Thank you very much. We want to thank the distinguished representative of Cuba for your statement, and do we now give the floor to Mr. Kaoru Maosaki, representative of Japan.
Madam Chair, I would first like to thank you, other Bureau members, and the Secretariat for organizing this session under these challenging circumstances. Older persons have been among the first and hardest hit by the human security crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Their health, livelihood, and dignity are now more severely at risk than ever before. In response to this crisis, the government of Japan has taken every measure to mitigate the pandemic's impact on older persons. The government has made particular efforts to secure the safe continuation of elder care facilities so that older persons can maintain an independent lifestyle with dignity. Madam Chair, earlier today, Ms. Carey referred to the centenarians in Japan. We are indeed the country with the highest population percentage of older persons for many years, and thus have abundant experience in protecting and promoting the rights of older persons, including the right to work and access to justice. In fact, on April 1st this year, a new bill will come into effect that urges businesses to provide employees with the choice to work until the age of 70. In addition, Japan Legal Support Center, a publicly owned corporation that is fully funded by the government, together with local authorities, legal experts, and social workers, has been proactively conducting outreach to older persons who need help understanding their legal situations or those who have difficulties seeking legal assistance to protect their rights. In international fora, Japan has been strongly promoting universal health coverage, which includes comprehensive community-based care and long-term care for older persons as a basic healthcare service. Last year, Japan and Chile co-facilitated the successful adoption of the General Assembly Resolution, United Nations Decade of Healthy Aging, 2021 to 2030. The government of Japan will continue to advocate for the rights and health of older persons, both in domestic and international fora, to protect their livelihood and dignity. Madam Chair, as we consider the way forward on the issue of aging, it is important for each country to steadily continue to implement the existing frameworks, such as the Madrid Action Plan, before developing a new international legal instrument. We hope that this working group will provide us with valuable opportunities to learn from each other through sharing of good practices and to enhance capacity building, thereby preparing us for adequate response to the challenges in an aging society. I thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank the delegation of Japan for your statement, and I now give the floor to Madam Megan White, a representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The United Kingdom welcomes this 11th session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. COVID-19 is and will continue to be an exceptional challenge. We know that older people face particular issues with the virus. We know that they are at greater risk of serious complications, including death, and that they are more likely to be affected by the socioeconomic impacts. So, despite all the challenges of the pandemic, it is important that the working group is able to meet to reflect on these issues that older people face in the enjoyment of their human rights. Madam Chair, global population aging is one of the greatest social and economic challenges of this century. It has and will continue to have substantive and substantial policy implications well beyond the immediate challenges of COVID-19. The UK remains fully committed to the rights of all persons, including older persons. We are clear that the whole spectrum of internationally recognized human rights applies to older persons, as they do to us all without distinction. We acknowledge the serious issues that older people face and will play a strong role in the protection and promotion of their human rights. The UK remains open to considering further standard setting to help provide a framework to address the issues faced by older persons, including the possibility of a multilateral instrument. We welcome the working group's ongoing focus on the substantive areas that we collectively need to address. We look forward to further discussions during this session, including deeper consideration of the impact of COVID-19 on older persons, and as we turn our attention to the two new issue clusters of the right to work and access to the labor market and access to justice. We have much to discuss, and once again we welcome the contribution of the independent expert and all panelists on these important issues. Finally, we would like to reiterate the importance we attach to strong and diverse civil society participation. without which our work would lose a vital component. We welcome the ongoing participation of our civil society and national human rights institution colleagues and look forward to hearing their views. Thank you.
Agradecemos a la delegación.
I thank the United Kingdom for your statement, and I now give the floor to Madam Yasmin Ali, representative of Singapore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Singapore is fully committed to the advancement of older persons and reaffirms our support for the full and effective implementation of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging. While in the nearly 20 years since its adoption, there has been progress in its implementation, serious and persistent challenges and gaps remain. In this regard, the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging continues to serve as the primary international forum for addressing and reviewing issues related to the advancement of older persons, including how the international community can take action to close such gaps. Age-inclusive implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is critical to achieving its goals and targets. Singapore's national policies for our older persons are in line with the aspirations of the 2030 Agenda. We are fully committed to building a society for all ages and empowering our seniors to age healthily and confidently in place so that no one is left behind. Singaporeans have amongst the longest life expectancies at birth in the world. By 2030, 1 in 4 Singaporeans will be aged 65 and above, and older persons are expected to make up approximately half of our population by 2050. While there are challenges associated with aging populations, there are opportunities too. We believe that older persons should be viewed as valuable members of society who can make meaningful contributions. It is for this reason that in Singapore, we seek to turn aging into a positive force for social and economic development and to support older persons to stay active and engaged and feel a sense of worth and purpose as they age. The government engaged Singaporeans from all walks of life to launch the Action Plan for Successful Aging in 2015 with initiatives targeted at 3 levels. 1, at the individual level, we are creating opportunities for seniors to remain active through programs that facilitate lifelong learning and senior volunteerism. At the community level, we are building inclusive communities and promoting intergenerational harmony by reaching out to seniors to understand their needs and creating opportunities for seniors and youth to interact. At the national level, we are transforming Singapore into an age-friendly city with more senior-friendly amenities and wheelchair-accessible transport options. Singapore has also recently embarked on a refresh of the action plan to ensure that it continues to meet the needs and aspirations of current and future seniors. We will continue to improve the accessibility and quality of elder care services to meet the evolving care needs of seniors. Since 2015, Singapore has increased home and daycare capacity to better support seniors to age in place. We have also enhanced the quality and variety of care services. For example, we have improved the design and living environment of nursing homes, as well as strengthened dementia care capabilities. We have also introduced new integrated home and daycare packages and upcoming housing models integrated with care services to facilitate independent living for single elderly persons. In order to strengthen community support for our seniors, Singapore has revised the service model of elder care centres to provide a common suite of active aging programs, befriending services, and connecting seniors to care services. All our seniors will have access to these centres and their services. Lastly, we have enhanced support for caregivers of seniors. For example, they can access more respite options and socio-emotional support services. In 2019, we introduced a home caregiving grant for eligible care recipients to help defray the costs of caregiving. Madam Chair, Singapore has made significant progress in building an inclusive society and enhancing the well-being of our elderly in line with our ongoing efforts to implement the 2030 Agenda. We remain firmly committed to implementing the Madrid Plan of Action and the Sustainable Development Goals. Singapore will continue in our efforts to ensure that older persons continue to live fulfilling lives as valued members of society. Thank you.
I thank the delegation of Singapore for your statement, and I now give the floor to Mr. Ishu, representative of France. Madam Chair, thank you very much. France welcomes the holding of this 11th meeting of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. We would like first and foremost to thank you, Madam Chair, and the Bureau and the Secretariat for your efforts which have made it possible to hold this very important meeting. We would also like to hail the member states present here, experts and representatives of civil society, and just recall how important it is to work together and to exchange views to achieve a concrete and satisfactory result. The situation of older people and the protection and promotion of their rights is more than ever a priority for our country. We believe on this point that we can do much more by effectively implementing existing instruments in the area of human rights. We acknowledge that there's sometimes a gap between the awareness of a global problem and the effective implementation by member states of measures to remedy the problem. As we have stressed several times, a better incorporation of the human rights of older people in the mechanisms of the United Nations, for example, by putting more systematically the rights of older people at the center of the activities of its agencies, could be an effective measure. Those who have special mandates in the area of human rights and the treaty bodies should be encouraged to pay particular attention to the rights of older people in the framework of their mandates. Furthermore, the Universal Periodic Review could be used to highlight the challenges to which older people are confronted in the area of human rights. This can be done both by member states and by the other actors who take part in the sessions of the Universal Periodic Review, such as national human rights defense bodies and civil society organizations. The situation of older people must be considered in the framework of a global assessment of the human rights situation in each country. And with this in mind, we are convinced that these working sessions are very useful thanks to an exchange of good practices and thanks to the very specific fact-based analysis that make it possible for us to examine the implementation of new projects and new plans of actions that older people around the world have so much greatly need, in particular in this time of pandemic. Thank you very much. I want to thank the representative of France for your statement. We now give the floor to the representative of Egypt, Madam Asha Kamal Ibrahim.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chair. The Egyptian constitution has a specific article confirming the state's commitment to guaranteeing the rights of older persons in health, economic, social and cultural terms, as well as for their recreational activities and providing them with an appropriate pension for a decent life, allowing them to participate in public life. In its infrastructure plans, the government takes into account the needs of older persons and encourages civil society organisations to participate in providing care for them. Last year, we began our preparations for this session, but the pandemic meant we had to put it off. We thank the mission of Argentina for its determination to hold this meeting. Since this postponement, the world has undergone unprecedented changes, particularly for older persons, who represent the weakest and most vulnerable category in terms of the effects of the pandemic. This period has thrown light on the double pressures faced by older persons. Firstly, social isolation, then a lack of access to modern virtual technologies. In addition, there have been negative situations which must absolutely be corrected, such as the shameful and regrettable practices of a non-provision of health care, appropriate health care. The media have highlighted these practices and they must be corrected as quickly as possible. Egypt underlines the importance of including older persons in response plans to the pandemic and in rebuilding plans, particularly in terms of building robust, resilient health systems. At the beginning of this month, Egypt began a vaccination campaign for older persons and for those with chronic illnesses. people signed up and those who signed up electronically to be vaccinated. Egypt hopes to increase the number of people covered by the vaccination campaign as soon as extra doses are received. The vaccination of older persons happened straight after that for medical workers who were in the first line. Finally, Egypt reaffirms its commitment to establish policies which respect the rights of older persons, guarantee their dignity in a context of solidarity between generations and respect for the contribution of older persons to society. I thank you. We thank the distinguished representative of Egypt for that statement, and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mexico, Ms. Alma Santa Ana. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We congratulate you for your election to the head of the open-ended working group on aging. You can count upon Mexico's support so as to achieve a fruitful session with full respect for human rights and dignity of older persons. The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on older persons is clear. Pursuant to their right to preferential access to health services, the vaccination campaign in Mexico has focused primarily on older persons. Mexico renews its call upon member states to comply with their commitments under Resolution 74/274 on international cooperation to guarantee global access to medicines, vaccines and medical equipment to tackle COVID-19. A coordinated response of the UN to the pandemic has been provided, but nevertheless benefits for the health of older persons require greater cooperation and solidarity by the international community. Madam Chair, the sufferings associated with this stage of life put older persons at risk of suffering from complications in their well-being. Moreover, some may experience isolation, depression, economic dependence, or some disability which prevents them from enjoying their daily activities or carrying out their daily activities. Older women, although they live for a longer time, do not always live their old age in the best conditions. Often, they must fulfill a double role: people with needs for care and providers of care at the same time. The recognition of these and other problems in Mexico meant that last year we increased to constitutional rank the right to older persons to receive a non-contributory pension. Moreover, the unemployment situation is even more complicated for older persons. Mexico recognizes their right to equal opportunities in access to work, seeking to ensure that they have their own income and productive work. Mexico also recognizes the right of older persons to equality in access to justice and legal certainty. Nevertheless, the compliance with the rights of older persons will not be possible if inequalities persist in terms of production and distribution of vaccines. Finally, we are in favour of the fact that this working group address this issue with urgency. Chair, we reiterate Mexico's commitment to maintain close cooperation with the working group and with other member states and all interested parties during this session. Thank you very much. We thank the distinguished delegation of Mexico for that statement and now give the floor to Mr. Kasim Aziz, representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, let me begin by congratulating you on assuming the chair of the open-ended working group on aging. Madam Chair, since the last session of the working group, the world has been and continues to be profoundly affected by the global pandemic. While the COVID-19 has seriously affected the lives of many groups, its consequences have been amplified by existing structures of inequality and disadvantage. The impact on older persons has been particularly devastating. Older persons have shown a greater susceptibility to severe cases of infection and have represented the overwhelming proportion of lives lost. Like many governments around the world, Pakistan too had to take some hard decisions in order to curb the spread of the virus. However, we ensure that these measures do not adversely impact the rights of the older persons. Special emphasis was placed on the policy and programmatic interventions targeted towards raising awareness of the special needs and specific vulnerabilities of the elderly, with advice and guidelines for ensuring their protection, safety, comfort, and well-being. Madam Chair, Pakistan fully recognizes the importance of raising awareness of the special needs of the older persons as well as their contribution to the functioning of the societies in which they live. Through progressive legislation and policy reforms, we are addressing the structural barriers that prevent full and effective participation of older persons in society. In this regard, our Ministry of Human Rights has drafted the Senior Citizens Bill, focusing primarily on ensuring adequate living standards and social protections for the elderly. When enacted, the draft law would institute essential protections to ensure that the elderly live a meaningful life and to limit barriers that prevent their full participation in society. It would also establish a Senior Citizens Council, which will work towards ensuring that senior citizens are given priority in hospitals and medical facilities. 3 provincial governments have already enacted similar legislations. Madam Chair, we recognize the need, urgency, and way forward in dealing with this very important issue. Despite the differences of views on the way forward, there is a genuine desire to understand and address the concerns related to promotion and protection of the rights of the older persons. We are sympathetic to the views of the colleagues who intend embarking on the road to crafting a new convention on the subject. However, the counter view which underlines the need to first identify gaps in the process with a view to finding appropriate solutions are also important and merit our careful consideration. We believe that the discussions held during this session would provide due guidance in formulating and crystallizing different options from the perspective of their applicability, utility, and comprehensiveness. Guided by the common desire to ensure the best for this respected segment of our society, we must move forward in accordance with our national and development priorities to ensure that the older persons are not discriminated against. In conclusion, we reiterate the assurance of our constructive engagement and support in carrying forward the work of this working group. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much to the distinguished delegation of Pakistan. We now give the floor to the delegation of Ethiopia. Ms. Eleni Henok, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I wish to applaud you and all the Bureau members for preparing this session and for managing to convene us in this unprecedented time. Madam Chair, the issues of the elderly are increasingly gaining the attention they deserve in various development programs. Ethiopia's Growth and Transformation Plan, implemented between 2010 and 2020, was considered as the first comprehensive development plan to have recognized the importance of addressing the issues relating to the elderly. This micro-development policy was accompanied by relevant practical instruments that made possible the implementation of the policy's issues. In this regard, Ethiopia's National Social Protection Policy was enacted in 2014. This was accompanied by the National Plan of Action for the Elderly, covering the years between 2016 and 2020. This was followed by the development of an institutional service provision standard and an implementation manual with the participation of relevant stakeholders. This policy instruments outline the areas where the elderly need the most support, such as human rights, employment and income generation, health, education, social security, and family and community care. Despite major improvements in the past 2 decades, the majority of the elderly in Ethiopia still live in poverty. The onset of COVID-19 pandemic brought an added challenge that has had huge effect on elderly people. The physical, mental, economic, and social effects of the COVID-19 proved to be severe among the elderly when compared to other age groups. The measures employed to prevent the transmission of the virus and the shifting of resources to COVID-19 related response measures further worsened the situation of older persons, especially those with pre-existing conditions, as it created a barrier to provide health services for other health issues. We in Ethiopia understand that the public and private sector stakeholders should work in tandem for sustainably addressing the needs of the elderly, especially in the post-COVID-19 world. In this regard, the policies and practices that concern the status of the elderly are being devised and put to practice in a manner that brings brings in the opinions and concerns of the actors in the ecosystem. Madam Chair, Ethiopia has also been making significant strides in mainstreaming regional and international legal instruments in the area of rights of the elderly. For instance, in response to the resolution of the African Union on the responsibility of the African states to uphold the human rights of all persons to social protection, Ethiopia has undertaken the responsibility to develop a pilot cash transfer program. Upon initial success, this program was scaled to the different regions of the country with the aim of improving the lives of the elderly and other vulnerable sections of the society. On the service delivery front, Ethiopia has registered significant improvements. My country believes that elderly learning should be a lifelong experience, and thus close to 5 million people in the elderly category were provided with trainings to improve their lives. Moreover, the Productivity Safety Net program has expanded to include more than 300,000 elderly beneficiaries, both in the rural and urban areas. The pension system has also been expanded, and currently there are 3.5 million beneficiaries on the public pension system and 2.5 million beneficiaries in the private pension system. Madam Chair, in conclusion, I would like to reiterate Ethiopia's commitment to the promotion of the elderly by improving and expanding programs that contribute to the betterment of the elderly. Along the spirit of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, Ethiopia will redouble its efforts to develop social development programs to reduce poverty and protect its citizens from the advent of intergenerational poverty. Ethiopia would as well continue the effort to create fertile ground for the realization of the ideals contained in the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging adopted at the Second World Assembly. This is all the more important considering the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and the disproportionate negative effects it entails for the elderly. And I would like to draw the attention of development partners and multilateral entities, including the UN system, to assist countries that are carrying tremendous burden in this fight. I thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
I thank the delegation of Ethiopia for that statement. And now, to close the list of speakers, I will give the floor to the representative of the Holy See, His Excellency Archbishop Gabriele Caccia.
Chair, the Holy See congratulates you on your election and is grateful to Your Excellency and the Bureau for all its efforts in advance of this 11th session. The enjoyment of universal recognized human rights must be founded on human dignity. This dignity, however, is often undermined and rejected whenever persons are no longer seen as a paramount value to be cared for and respected, especially when poor or disabled, not yet useful, like the unborn, or not longer needed, like the elderly. The most effective way to weaken the struggle for justice, Pope Francis warns us, is to empty great words of their meaning. This clearly takes place when the elderly are thrown aside, even when doing so is justified by a distorted notion of human rights. The Holy See strongly believes that those who make room for the elderly make room for life. Madam Chair, in the labor market and the world of work, many elderly continue to face unjust age discrimination that undermines the dignity both of their work and often as workers. This comes to the fore in all aspects of work, including application and hiring processes, the work experience itself, and opportunities after retirement. The elderly has wisdom, experience, and skills that should not be cast aside. But focusing only on paid works risks trivializing the irreplaceable unpaid work in the family so often done by elderly. Such concrete contributions to the family as well as to society through elderly volunteers deserve much greater recognition. Providing the elderly with access to justice involves both long-standing and emerging challenges. care must be taken to ensure that the digital divide between old and young, as well as disparities in education and resources that impede access to legal services more broadly, do not increase with age. It is vital that the real needs and dignity of older men and women are properly taken into account. This applies to access to social protection and care programs, to health care, to the right to give informed consent, and to guardianship arrangements. Finally, the elderly comprise the largest portion of lives lost due to the pandemic. During the first wave of the pandemic, a significant number of COVID-19 deaths occurred in institutions for the elderly, places that should have protected this most fragile part of society, and where instead death struck disproportionately. Relegating the elderly to institutions that are unable adequately to care for all their needs, yet propose as the only possible solution to look after them, exposes many elderly persons to neglect, abuse, violence, and in case of the pandemic, to increased risk of violations of the rights to life and health. More consideration should be given to guaranteeing the best possible continuum of care, preserving, as far as possible, the bonds of elder persons with loved ones and with the familiar environment. The full statement has been distributed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Muchas gracias a la...
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the delegation of the Holy See for that statement, and we now close the list of speakers from states and open the floor to human rights and civil society organizations. First of all, here we have Ms. Anna Chabiera from the Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights of Poland.
Madam Chair, distinguished delegates. First, let me thank you for the opportunity to address you on behalf of the Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights of Poland and on behalf of the group of 51 stakeholders, including 14 national human rights institutions and 37 civil society organizations from many different parts of the globe. Our institutions and organizations are of the firm view that a comprehensive, binding international instrument would provide the strongest protection for the rights of older persons. Following discussions at the previous sessions of the UN Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, the decision to invite relevant stakeholders to submit normative content on the thematic areas discussed has increased understanding of how human rights apply in older age. However, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on older persons worldwide has made it clear that we need to accelerate our efforts to strengthen the international framework for the protection of human rights in older age. We endorse the UN Secretary General's call to, and I quote, build stronger legal frameworks at both national and international levels to protect the human rights of older persons, including by accelerating the efforts of the General Assembly Working Group to develop proposals for an international legal instrument to promote and protect the rights and dignity of older persons, end of quote. Building on the voluminous material that has already been presented to the UN Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, we believe it is time for the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging to formally decide to commence the drafting of a new international instrument, which should be elaborated as a binding convention on the human rights of older persons. We wish to highlight the importance of referring in the new instrument to the dignity, autonomy, and independence of older persons, equality and participation in society. These principles should be affirmed in the preamble and in the text of the new convention that should also identify the necessary steps to ensure the protection from ageism, the full enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms by older persons. Moreover, a new convention should satisfy the following conditions: not lower the highest existing international human rights standards, stress the positive potential of older persons and guarantee their enjoyment of capabilities and human rights on an equal basis with others without discrimination. state that the rights holders are older persons who constitute a heterogeneous group of persons of various capabilities and needs who may also play multiple roles in the society. It should take into account the necessity of an intersectional approach as well as the perspectives of the most vulnerable groups. Indicate that the changing technologies and climate change affect the lives of older persons and aging societies, and it should frame them in the context of human rights. The list of signatories of the statement is to be found in written version of the statement. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much for the statement from the Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights of Poland. I now give the floor again on a pre-recorded statement to Ms. Nino Lomarcharia, Public Defender of Georgia.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, it is my great pleasure to address you today on this truly important occasion and discuss briefly the challenging human rights situation of elderly population in Georgia and worldwide. At the outset, I would like to underline that the Office of Public Defender of Georgia as an A-status national human rights institution is of the firm view that a binding international instrument will provide the strongest protection for the rights of elderly people. Therefore, we fully support the joint statement of the NHRIs and CSOs delivered for the 11th session of the UN Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. The Convention will be a crucial mechanism for protecting the rights of elderly persons around the globe. Let me point out that the population is aging rapidly in Georgia, and the demographic dynamics have a growing impact on the socio-economic developments of the country. In 2020, the share of the population aged 65 and older was 15.1% of the total population. In Georgia, the elderly are one of the most vulnerable groups and are at higher risk of poverty and human rights abuses. They are often dependent on social assistance and pensions and have to live in difficult conditions. Discrimination based on age, neglect, maltreatment, abuse, violence, the risk of poverty and homelessness, lack of targeted programs, and the shortage of measures taken towards the welfare of the elderly at the local level represent the main challenges faced by the elderly. We discuss these problems annually and provide the responsible state institutions with relevant recommendations. Nevertheless, the state fails to take effective measures to improve the well-being of elderly people. The COVID-19 pandemic worsened the human rights situation of elderly people and made the challenges faced by this vulnerable group even more vivid. The global health crisis showed us clearly that there is an urgent need to strengthen the international mechanisms and frameworks for protecting the elderly population. Therefore, we believe that adoption of binding international instrument is a crucial element in gaining the strongest protection for the rights of elderly people. Thank you very much for your attention.
Rudolf.
Thank you very much. We now give the floor to Dr. Beata Rudolph, head of the German Institute for Human Rights.
Madam Chairperson, members of the Bureau, Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, thank you for this opportunity to address you remotely from Berlin in my capacity as Director of the German Institute for Human Rights. The pandemic prevented us from meeting at the open-ended working group last year, and it is still a challenge to have meaningful exchanges. I would like to acknowledge the hard work of you and all key stakeholders between the sessions to strengthen the human rights of older persons. The 11th session is dedicated to the right to work and access to the labor market, as well as access to justice. We have discussed these issues in Germany with relevant stakeholders in preparation for this session. We identified many barriers for older persons that hinder them from fully enjoying their human rights. For example, negative images of older persons render it difficult to enter the labor market if one is above 50 years of age. Furthermore, older persons are very often not seen as rights holders, and state measures do not take into account the diversity and different needs of older persons. COVID-19 has put a spotlight on the rights of older persons. Older persons have been left behind without support, without access to the healthcare they needed, and they died alone. In Germany, we witnessed that older persons in care institutions were severely hit by measures restricting their personal autonomy and their right to contact with family and friends, which negatively impacted on their health. Yet the pandemic also creates momentum to make older persons visible. It has been encouraging to hear so many important stakeholders speak up on the rights of older persons in the context of the pandemic. I would like to highlight the Secretary General's policy brief, which was supported by 146 member states and several NGOs and NHRIs. I would also like to commend the High Commissioner for Human Rights and many UN agencies for including the rights of older persons in their work. But ensuring the rights of older persons is still not a priority in most states. What we have worked out in many sessions of the open-ended working group and in between is that we are lacking specific norms which guide the states in implementing the rights of older persons. Therefore, we have to step up our common engagement for a comprehensive and integrated international legal instrument. The current system is not sufficient. Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
I thank the representative of Germany. And now, in a pre-recorded statement, I give the floor to Dr. Kiran Rabheru from ILC Canada.
This statement is on behalf of International Longevity Centre of Canada and on behalf of the 394 member organizations of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Older People. Responses to the COVID-19 pandemic at all levels of governance have exposed significant gaps and systemic failures in the protection of the human rights of older persons. Across every region, older persons have been denied their human rights, discriminated against on the basis of their age, and subjected to ageist hate speech, stigmatization, prejudice, abuse, and neglect. 146 member states recognize these violations and committed to respecting the rights of older persons by supporting the United Nations Secretary General's policy brief on the impact of COVID-19 on older persons. This commitment, made by 75% of all United Nations member states, means that the open-ended working group can no longer ignore its responsibility to fulfill the mandate given to it by the UN General Assembly to develop proposals for the main elements of an international legal instrument. Since the mandate was issued, a number of member states have blocked progress or stayed silent on efforts to better protect the rights of older persons in a new legal instrument. The discrimination and denial of all older persons' rights evident in responses to the pandemic have reaffirmed the fallacy of their arguments that existing human rights instruments are adequate and there are no protection gaps to fill. To continue to delay progress is indefensible in the face of preventable deaths, restrictions of rights, discrimination, ageism, and neglect that older persons have been subjected to during this pandemic. We, the members of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Older People, call on member states at this open-ended working group to fulfill their mandate and immediately start drafting the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Older Persons. A UN convention would provide a guide on how to fully respect the rights of all older persons in all their diversity and trigger the changes in law, policy, and practice to make this happen. Further inaction by member states in the face of the evidence of the need for a convention is inexcusable.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Mr. Malenkov from Germany.
Thank you for giving me the floor. I speak on behalf of BAXO, the German National Association of Senior Citizens Organizations. BAXO expressly supports civil society and national human rights institutions in their call for a UN Convention on the Rights of Older Persons. This call is more than justified by the serious gaps in the protection of the rights of older people, identified in the past year's sessions of the Open-Ended Working Group and the recent analytical outcome study by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. These gaps alone show the urgency of a convention. The pandemic has exacerbated human rights encroachments worldwide, including in Germany. A convention urgently needs to incorporate new developments such as digitalization, including automated decision-making by artificial intelligence. These technological advances must be seen as a global phenomenon that fundamentally changes both individual areas of life and social coexistence worldwide. Unequal digital opportunities, the so-called digital divide, reinforce regional and social inequalities. To guarantee the right to enjoy the benefits of scientific progress and its applications, appropriate options must be provided for everyone who needs or wants to use available technologies and services. At the same time, alternative options must remain available to cover for diverse needs, abilities, and preferences. Although shortcomings such as the exclusion of marginalized and poor people, data security deficiencies, and the risks of threatening personal rights and dignity, they have been discussed time and again, their human rights implications have not yet been addressed by international law. Therefore, the global implications of digitalization must be incorporated into a convention for the rights of older people. Hence, we highly value the European Union's Council conclusions on human rights of older persons in the area of digitalization, put forward by the German government during its EU Council presidency. We urge all national states to get on with this process and consent to starting a draft of a UN Convention on the rights of older people without any further delay.
Muy bien. Agradecemos la
Very well, thank you. Now the next to take the floor is Madam Silvia Perelevin from IMPEA.
IMPEA welcomes this important and long overdue discussion on the human rights of older persons. This working group cannot simply pick up where it left off 2 years ago as if it was business as usual. This past year has seen unacceptable levels of preventable suffering and death by older persons. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed and exacerbated the systemic day-to-day discrimination faced by older people in virtually every country. We have been subjected to ageist hate speech and stigmatization. Many older persons, particularly older women, are suffering intolerable levels of violence, abuse, and neglect, both at home and in institutions. Ageism and the lack of adequate measures to protect older people's rights led to either the denial of treatment or non-admittance to hospital. Arbitrary age-based measures have deepened existing inequalities and denied older persons also equal access to social and economic security, employment, continued learning, support services, and justice. These are human rights violations. Government's failure to protect the rights of older citizens cannot be excused. We regret that there is not more representation of civil society and older persons in this session's program of work. We strongly protest the limitations imposed on our participation and the shrinking of the civil society space. However, we believe that we can make a difference this week. The world is watching. We call on member states to take meaningful steps towards the protection of the rights of people in older age. Listen to civil society. We are your partners. Hear what the panel experts say this week. Adopt the recommendations of the UN Secretary General, who called in his policy brief of May 20 to build stronger legal frameworks and to accelerate the efforts to develop proposals for an international legal instrument. Do include in the discussions of this session the OHCHR updated study on normative standards and adopt its recommendations, even if it is not in the program of work. Distinguished delegates, compliance with General Assembly resolutions is your duty. You have the mandate. Take the courageous, correct step to begin drafting the text for a binding UN convention to protect the rights of all older people. The time to act is now for the older persons of today and those of the future. Thank you.
Muy bien.
Thank you. Now I'd like to give the floor to Rohit Prasad from India.
Warm greetings. My name is Rohit Prasad. I am from HelpAge India, a non-profit working towards voicing the concerns of India's elderly since 1978. Mahatma Gandhi said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." I call upon the international community to wholeheartedly support this Convention on Rights of Older Persons and make this change happen. Population aging has been a global concern from the 1980s, but even today, it is considered a challenge only for the developed West. The low and middle income countries still think about the demographic dividend. However, despite our perceptions, the world is changing rapidly. In the not so distant future, 20% of the population in countries like India will be of older persons, a substantial number to contend with on income, health, and emotional insecurities. Would it be desirable to have them dependent and a burden on society? The gaping holes in systems the world over, especially on elder care, have been exposed by the pandemic. We believe that every challenge is also an opportunity. This one is too. All governments, voluntary organizations, older persons, experts, innovators, industry, investors should think about aging and quicken the pace of integrating the concerns of elderly. Let's not forget that one day we will all be there. That day, we would want it to feel like a blessing and not a curse. The Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging tried to change that thinking. It clearly states that elders should be treated as partners in economic development, and most states in the world are signatories to the document. Despite the best efforts of the SDG principle, leave no one behind, the elders are last and lost. One of the worst forms of ageism and discrimination is elder abuse. We were surprised to find in one of our surveys that 44% elderly reported experiencing elder abuse in public places. Ageism must be taken seriously in law and in real life. The case in point is the progressive law made by the Government of India called Maintenance and Welfare of Parents and Senior Citizens Act 2007. This path-breaking legislation ensured right to life with dignity and security of elders. The litmus test for success is implementation, and we should not let societal attitude, structural and behavioral apathy come in the way. I would like to conclude by saying that we must all pledge to build back better, a society where everybody has the right to age with dignity. The first step towards this should be to draft a UN Convention for Rights of Older Persons. The time to act is now, for if not now, then when? Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Mr. Kishore Takata from the Centers for Support for Research Activities for Older Persons in Japan.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. In Japan, human rights violations of older persons have been a social problem caused by government's policy that put more emphasis on financial cost cut, self-help and mutual help by people, rather than human rights protection by the state. With the impact of COVID-19, the situation has become more serious. Poverty among the older persons is increasing. Isolation among the older persons also become more serious, especially for caring the older family member. In fact, sad suicide cases or murder cases among family caregivers occurred several places in Japan after COVID-19 pandemic. In such a situation, June 2020, our NGO and Japan Senior Citizens Council, a nationwide CSO, made up the first draft of the Japanese Declaration of Human Rights of Older Persons. It was created by the initiative and participation of many Japanese older persons and their organizations. This declaration is the result of their belief that now is the time to focus on human rights protection, as same as the United Nations emphasizes. This draft set 5 basic principles after the UN Principles for Older Persons in 1991. It specifies 23 human rights that should be guaranteed for every older person, as well as the obligations of both national and local governments reflect the international human rights developments. It also expresses the older person's constant endeavor for realization of human rights based on the Constitution of Japan. Now, this draft is under discussion among not only older people, but also younger generation. Next year, the final draft will be decided. I hope all the participants here to know this Japanese older person's effort, and we are convinced that this effort will surely contribute to the realization of International Convention on Human Rights for Older Persons. I'd like to ask the United Nations and each member state to accelerate the action to develop the international treaty on older persons as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Eva Johansson from Age Platform Europe.
Mr. President and delegates, I'm speaking on behalf of Age Platform Europe, the largest European network of organizations of and for older people. The ongoing pandemic has rendered more visible than ever before that our society often treats older people as second-class citizens. Although governments have made commitments to increase the participation of older people in society, progress in practice is slow, limited, and inconsistent. Over the first wave of the pandemic, across the EU, older people in residential care suffered loneliness and exclusion and were often left abandoned, even to die alone. According to WHO estimates, around 50% of those who died of COVID-19 in the first wave were older people in residential care. To put it short, we have witnessed a flagrant violation of human rights and complete deviation of the EU government's commitments to facilitate older people's full participation in the society. Our experience from the pandemic requires us to make important decisions now about our future. As demonstrated in the recent UN report on ageism, ageism is harmful to individuals and society at large. If there's one thing that we can learn from the pandemic, let it be that we cannot treat older people's rights less serious. 146 member states, including all EU governments, have supported the brief of the UN Secretary General, which calls for developing a proposal for an international legal instrument to promote and protect the rights and dignity of older persons. We now ask all member states to use this open-ended working group session to make concrete steps towards drafting a convention that would guarantee the equal respect of our human rights when we get older. By supporting a convention, governments will show their commitment to leave no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Edward Arshukin from Russia. Ladies and gentlemen, I am sincerely grateful for the possibility of speaking at the 11th session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging in the UN and to share with you some aspects of social aging in Russia which are of great concern to us, members of the Coalition of the Right of Older People. Now, a quarter of the population of the country are older people, and so they carry the burden of having their interests infringed upon. That's the term used in the report of the Secretary General. 59% of Russian citizens consider poverty as the main problem of older people. Chronic poverty and lack of access to resources. This was made worse by the coronavirus, and of course this has become worse due to the pandemic. The main serious problem, according to 45% of Russians, is the health conditions of older people. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated this. 80% of those who have died from the infection in the country, according to official data, are older people. Why? Does our society ask, are geriatric services only been set up over the past few years? Why, in the framework of medical reforms, the number of hospital beds for infectious diseases has been decreased? The number of inpatient facilities for infectious diseases has been reduced. Why does the share of the GDP for healthcare so inadequate? We who help older people are worried about the state of our sector of civil society. We believe it's not up to the task of addressing the needs of older people, and it's equally poor. The sector has a shortage of resources and staff, including during the pandemic. We note with concern our isolation from foreign colleagues and a lack of joint projects. Now, the obvious infringement of the social and economic rights of older people can be countered only by a universal, comprehensive international document on the rights of older people. This is why we call on the government of the Russian Federation to actively support the adoption of a UN Convention on the Rights of Older People. Thank you. Thank you. There was unfortunately no interpretation into Spanish. And so I would ask the Secretary to ask the organization to provide a text that could be translated into the 6 official languages. Now I give the floor to Madam Ruth Finkelstein from the International Association of Geriatrics and Gerontologists.
First, the IAGG supports the Convention on the Rights of Older Persons and applauds the urgency GARA brings to its enactment, particularly in light of the pattern of discrimination we've seen during the pandemic. Access to labor markets and work is an economic issue for people of all ages. Work is important to defining one's purpose in life, standing in the community, social connectedness, and health. Importantly, older adults wish to remain productively engaged and have expertise and skills beneficial to the workplace. Nevertheless, work isn't possible or beneficial for every person of every age, and therefore a complementary goal of income support is necessary for those who cannot work. The lowest income countries have the highest labor force participation rates as calculated by the ILO. The rates for highest income countries are concomitantly higher. The extremely high participation rate for people in lowest income countries is of concern, since access to the labor market without additional income protection is not beneficial to health and well-being for many older adults. In the US, the anti-discrimination, age discrimination framework is provided by the ADAA, passed in 1967. However, decisions by the federal courts, including the Supreme Court, have significantly weakened its effectiveness, requiring that age discrimination be intentional, the only form of discrimination, and limiting applicability to job applicants. Therefore, the U.S. does not use a rights-based framework for addressing employment for older workers, but instead the remnants of a worker protection frame. Nonetheless, the labor force participation rate has been rising steadily, albeit at a slower rate for women than men, because of increases in retirement age, Social Security claiming, and increased longevity and the desire to work. At the same time, the other side of the story is that it's increasingly clear that older workers are systematically forced from the workforce by their employers. A recent reanalysis of the Health and Retirement Survey shows that half of workers over 50 will be eventually forced out of their jobs by their employers, albeit some of those departures will be renamed as retirement. In sum, labor force participation and income security for older people has benefits for individuals, families, and societies, and will only be uniformly enforced if there's a convention on the rights of older persons.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Teresa Orosa Rais from the Cuban Association of the United Nations, ACNUR. Welcome to all participants in the 11th session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. I'm sorry, but unfortunately the interpreter cannot work due to the quality of the sound, which is extremely poor.
Ha sido una necesidad, pero sin duda la pandemia le ha colocado un punto de urgencia. Como sabemos, en otros países se han cometido graves violaciones de los derechos de los mayores, como es el propio derecho a la vida, al no ser atendidos precisamente por ser mayores, al no ser atendidos en las salas de terapia intensiva ante el dilema de la última cama. Por otra parte, también se han observado diversos rebrotes de actitudes edadistas por imposición de medidas hacia los mayores, ignorando su capacidad de responsabilidad y de autonomía, así como por tratos infantilizadores. En segundo lugar, expresar que en mi país, en Cuba, la atención a las personas mayores cada día es más integral y no solamente liderada por la cobertura total de los sistemas de salud y de seguridad y asistencia social, sino también por programas provenientes de la cultura, de la actividad física y de la educación precisamente como un derecho universal para todos y para toda la vida. Durante la pandemia y aún bajo condiciones de un férreo recrudecimiento del bloqueo de los Estados Unidos a mi país, se ha priorizado toda la atención a la población cubana y especialmente a las personas mayores, porque como sabemos una gran parte de nosotros presenta altos índices de vulnerabilidad por factores de comorbilidad. Por lo tanto, se han protegido a los mayores que se encuentran institucionalizados, es decir, en los hogares de ancianos, a través de la pesquisa diaria, donde se atiende a toda la población, especialmente a las personas mayores en sus lugares de residencia, los sistemas de mensajería de alimentación y de medicamentos para los que viven solos o presentan condiciones de dependencia, y la atención también en salud mental, en la cual he tenido la posibilidad de participar por las posibles afectaciones que se pueden producir en los mayores en condiciones de aislamiento. Cuba tiene un 20,8% de personas de 60 años o más y una alta expectativa de vida de 78 años, pues sin duda nos encontramos inmersos en la campaña por el desarrollo del diseño del envejecimiento saludable y por supuesto para seguir participando en todos nuestros espacios comunitarios en la medida que las condiciones sanitarias lo vayan permitiendo. Les deseo mucha salud para todos y les reitero nuestro agradecimiento por la participación en esta sesión.
Agradecemos.
Thank you. The last speaker will be Help Age International, Spain, Mr. Alberto Infante.
In 2050, 1 of every 6 person in the world will be over 65, and in Europe, it'll be 1 in every 4. This means that aging is not necessarily measured with chronological age anymore, but rather capacity to be active, to produce, to consume, to generate knowledge and wealth. However, this will also mean new challenges because of the persistence of prejudices and vulnerability for many older persons, which restricts their autonomy and their ability to be productive in society. One of the most frequent causes for ageism is this mentality which associates youth with productive capacity and old age with the opposite. This has been reinforced during the recent economic crises, where many spokespersons of neoliberalism question the sustainable nature of public pensions because of increased life expectancy much beyond retirement. It is absurd in being seen as a problem. It's one of the greatest achievements of contemporary civilization indeed. In our societies, youth is often seen as a paradigm of youth, agility and smartness, compared to the slowness and laziness of those perceived in older age. This has also been cited as a reason for marginalisation for older people. This has led to stereotypes which are often sustained by a powerful publicity industry, leading to prejudices, infantilisation and discrimination against older persons in various areas of their social lives.
Agradecemos
We express gratitude for that final statement by civil society, Mr. Alberto Infante, and have now concluded the general discussion and item 5 of the agenda. Before adjourning today's meeting, I would like to call attention to the rest of the week and what we will be doing next, particularly item 6, which will happen tomorrow. Agenda item 6 will be tomorrow with 2 very interesting panels in the morning. We will have the honour of chairing and moderating the high-level panel on COVID-19 and older persons, which were mentioned so many times during today's statement. Tomorrow we will hear from the experts on that and renowned authorities. In the afternoon, we will then be able to follow up on the priority areas just discussed during the previous session, the 10th session in Resolution 75152. Considering the contributions made by Member States from a normative point of view on education, capacity building, lifelong learning, and capacity generation, as well as social protection and social security. This will be the work tomorrow. In both cases, we will have interpretation through the Interprify platform, which you all know. This platform will allow us to have interpretation for 2 hours in the morning from 10 o'clock until 12 o'clock and 2 hours in the afternoon from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock. Having said that, this meeting will now be adjourned. I will have to make the usual statement and call the attention of delegations to the letter circulated on the 26th of February 2021, which has information regarding the occupational safety and health plan for this meeting, including the possibility of follow-up in the unfortunate and hopefully unlikely event of a case of COVID-19. Following the arrangements in recent meetings, the Secretariat will actively manage the exit by calling each row for departure in a staggered manner. Delegations are therefore requested to remain seated after the adjournment of the meeting. There are very few of us who are here right till the end, but we still need to follow this same protocol nevertheless. Thank you very much for having been here all this time with us. The meeting is adjourned.